The first thing I remember was the sound, not the kind that belongs in this world, but the steady hum of a machine that seemed to breathe for me. My eyelids felt heavy, my throat raw. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling lights were blinding, clinical, too white. I was in a hospital, the kind that smelled like antiseptic and secrets. A voice cut through the noise. "You are lucky to be alive, Captain Holt." I tried to answer, but only air came out. My tongue was thick, my ribs ached. My right hand was wrapped in gauze. I turned my head slowly. The monitor beside me pulsed in a rhythm that didn't feel like mine. Through the glass door, I saw uniforms moving. Blue scrubs, gray fatigues, and one man in dress blues, hands behind his back. My father, Colonel Robert Holt. His posture perfect as always, his expression unreadable. When he stepped in, the air grew colder. "You made quite a mess, Reagan," he said. The words landed like a blade, precise and effortless. I wanted to ask about the plane, about Daniel, about the fire that swallowed the sky, but my voice failed. The doctor glanced at my father before answering my unspoken question. The other pilot did not make it. My chest tightened. Daniel Pierce. His name felt foreign now, like a secret I should not speak. My father moved closer. "You will focus on recovery. That is an order." Even lying half-broken in a hospital bed, I could feel the same pressure that shaped every year of my life. His authority was oxygen and poison at once. He left without touching me. I was alone again, except for the steady beep of the monitor and the faint memory of Daniel's voice on the radio before it all went dark. A nurse adjusted the blanket and whispered, "You've been out for 2 days. They said it was an engine failure." I nodded, though the word failure didn't fit. Something inside me said it wasn't that simple. Later that night, when the hallway went quiet, I reached for the folded flight jacket hanging on the chair. The fabric smelled of smoke and salt. As I lifted it, something small slipped from the pocket and hit the floor with a soft tap. A black USB drive wrapped in plastic and a scrap of paper with handwriting I knew too well. "If I don't make it 142B." My pulse quickened. Daniel's writing. My breath came shallow, my body still weak, but my mind suddenly clear. He must have hidden it there before the flight. 142B. It sounded like a storage unit, a code, or maybe both. I stared at the note until the letters blurred. The memory of the explosion flashed again. The red warning light, the sudden silence on comms. A shadowed figure inside the base control tower. My hands trembled. I tucked the note under the pillow as footsteps approached. The doctor entered with a clipboard, followed by a man in a suit I didn't recognize. The kind of man who smiled too much but never meant it. He asked routine questions, name, rank, serial number. Then came the last one. "Do you remember what happened up there?" His tone was light, but his eyes sharp. I shook my head, playing the broken soldier. When they left, I whispered to myself, "I remember enough." The machines hummed again, steady and mechanical. I closed my eyes, but sleep refused to come. All I could see was the ocean burning beneath the falling jet and Daniel's last glance before impact. Something about the way he reached for the cockpit recorder. He knew. My father's words echoed in my skull. "You made quite a mess." Maybe the mess wasn't mine. I turned the USB drive over in my hand, its surface cold. The paper's edges were frayed, like Daniel wrote it fast, maybe in fear. I felt a pulse of anger under the morphine haze. They wanted me to believe it was an accident. They wanted me quiet. But Daniel had left something, and I owed him the truth. I pressed the USB against my palm until the plastic bit into my skin. Outside, thunder rolled over the Virginia coast and rain streaked the glass. I decided that the moment I could walk, I would find out what was inside 142B. The beep of the monitor aligned with my heartbeat, steady, deliberate. They thought I was broken. They were wrong. If you were me, lying there between the hum of machines and the weight of silence, would you open that drive or wait until you were ready to face what it meant? Tell me what you would do. I grew up on the edge of the runway at Langley, where the sound of jet engines was louder than bedtime stories. My earliest memories were not of lullabies, but of commands shouted over the roar of takeoffs. My father, Colonel Robert Holt, believed in order more than affection. He used to say emotion is what gets soldiers killed. I was 10 when he first handed me a rifle. The metal was cold and heavy, the kind of weight a child should never carry. He placed his hand over mine, adjusting my grip. Breathe on the exhale. Feel nothing. His voice was calm, rehearsed a teacher shaping clay. I hit the target, but he never said good job. He only nodded and said again. By 12, I could dismantle and reassemble a weapon faster than any of the recruits he trained. By 14, I stopped trying to talk to him about anything that wasn't tactical. He wore his grief like another medal. My mother had died in a training accident before I could remember her. Her photo sat on his desk framed, but turned slightly away, as if even her face might distract him. The silence between us was constant, measured, and absolute. Every decision in my life was planned according to his blueprint. College major flight school. When I tried to apply for civilian aviation, he shredded the letter. "You're a Holt. Holts fly for the flag, not for money." I thought obedience was loyalty. It took me years to see the difference. The Air Force became both my cage and my escape. I joined intelligence because I wanted to think, to analyze, to find truth beneath command. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father called it soft work. Real soldiers get their boots dirty. I let him think I was weak. It was easier than explaining that I preferred data to destruction. But intelligence didn't mean safety. By the time I turned 26, I was flying secondary pilot missions in the Recon 7 program, mapping infrared patterns and cross-referencing satellite data for coastal defense. It was precise, methodical, the kind of work that left no room for error or emotion. And yet, that's where I met Daniel Pierce. Daniel wasn't like the others. While most officers carried their rank like armor, he carried curiosity. He asked questions he wasn't supposed to ask. Why were certain recon flights labeled classified beyond top secret when their routes were domestic? Why did logistics budgets for medical evacuation double every quarter without corresponding missions? He used to joke that data doesn't lie. People do. We met in the briefing room over a corrupted telemetry file. He leaned over my shoulder and said, "Your checksum's off." It was the first time someone corrected me without condescension. From then on, we spoke the same language logic code pattern. Off duty, we'd sit in the hangar long after curfew, watching the glow of runway lights fade into the fog. He told me he joined the Air Force because his father never believed he could. I told him I joined because mine never gave me a choice. We were both trying to prove something. The night he touched my hand for the first time, a storm rolled across the base, thunder shaking the glass. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. His kindness felt dangerous. He saw through the steel my father had welded around me. For months, we kept it quiet. Fraternization rules, chain of command. None of that scared me. What scared me was that for the first time in my life, I felt free. He said once, "When you look at those planes, do you ever think they're trying to escape?" I laughed, but I understood. Daniel made me believe escape was possible. That illusion shattered the night my father found out. He summoned me to his quarters without warning. On his desk lay a photo of Daniel and me taken near the maintenance bay. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. "You are compromising the uniform, Reagan." His tone was low, controlled, lethal. I told him Daniel was a good man, that our relationship didn't interfere with duty. He said, "You don't feel. You serve." The words struck like a verdict. I remember his hand tightening around the photo before tearing it in half. "You will end this, or I will." I walked out that night, the pieces of that photograph still on the floor. I ended it the next day, not because he ordered me to, but because Daniel deserved a world not dictated by my father's shadow. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would find a way to be both a soldier and a person. I was wrong. Months later, Daniel was transferred to the Recon 7 Test Flight Division, and I was assigned as his co-pilot. My father called it a coincidence. I called it punishment. Every mission briefing after that felt like a trap built from paperwork and protocol. I kept my head down, answered every order with "yes, sir," and buried what was left of the part of me that wanted to feel. In intelligence, you learn to read patterns in chaos. Somewhere along the line, I started recognizing that same pattern in my own life. How obedience kept turning into silence, how silence turned into complicity. I was tired of being precise for people who used precision to hide the truth. The Air Force taught me to collect data to verify sources to confirm anomalies. What it didn't teach me was how to disobey. The morning of the crash, I woke up before dawn. Daniel was already in the hangar checking the diagnostics manually, even though it wasn't required. He smiled when he saw me. "Big day, Captain. You ready to prove them wrong?" I said I was. I didn't know what he meant until later when I found the anomaly file he'd encrypted on my tablet. It contained fragments of communication logs, hints of unauthorized overrides in the telemetry systems. He'd been tracking someone. I confronted him after the mission briefing demanded to know what he was doing. He said, "I'm not doing this for them anymore. I'm doing this for us, for truth." I told him to stop before it got him killed. He looked at me calm and said, "You sound just like your father." I didn't realize that would be the last thing he ever said to me. When I close my eyes, I still hear his voice in that storm. I still see my father standing in the doorway of my hospital room, expressionless, as if grief were a weakness. Sometimes I wonder if he ever felt anything after my mother died, or if he buried it so deep that he thought control was love. For 30 years, I believed him. That loyalty was measured by silence. That love was proven through sacrifice. But in that hospital bed with a scar running down my arm and Daniel's message in my pocket, I started to see the truth. Control is not protection. Obedience is not honor. And sometimes the only way to serve is to refuse. 1 month before the accident, the base felt ordinary in the way danger often hides in routine. Every morning I walked past the same flag, the same security gate, the same coffee burned too long in the operations room. But small things had started to feel wrong. I was analyzing logistics data for the Med-Evac Research Division when I noticed figures that didn't add up. The numbers pulsed on the screen like a quiet alarm. Transfers marked as equipment maintenance showed totals far beyond any supply cost. Hundreds of thousands shifted in and out of shadow accounts every week. On paper, they looked like humanitarian contracts. In reality, they looked like cover. I sent a preliminary anomaly report up the chain to General Marcus Brandt. He was the kind of officer whose handshake could freeze a room, whose smile promised nothing. The reply came 2 hours later. "You are overstepping, Captain." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Daniel told me to let it go. He said Brandt was political untouchable. His advice was simple: if you want to stay alive, stay small. But Daniel's own eyes betrayed curiosity. We both knew that patterns like this never stopped at numbers. That night in the data room, I made a copy of the financial records and compressed them into an encrypted USB. It felt like stealing from the system I'd sworn to protect. The irony wasn't lost on me. At 200, the power flickered across the wing. I pulled the drive, hid it in my flight suit, and pretended nothing had happened. The next morning, Brandt appeared in the hangar with his entourage inspecting Recon 7's new telemetry units. He stopped near my jet, his reflection sharp against the silver hull. "You'll be flying the test mission next month," he said. His tone left no space for choice. When I nodded, he added, "Make sure your instruments report only what we ask them to." Then he walked away. The phrase lodged in my mind like shrapnel. Only what we ask them to. Daniel found me later pacing near the maintenance bay. He had that look, equal parts fear and defiance. He told me he'd been reviewing code embedded in the new telemetry software and found lines that didn't belong there. Backdoors rerouting data to a private server. He wanted to report it but couldn't prove who installed them. The implication was clear. Someone high up wanted control over every bite of that mission. We agreed to stay quiet until we could verify. Every day after that felt heavier, the base air thick with something unsaid. I started noticing surveillance. The same sedan parked outside my off-base apartment. The same 2 men in civilian clothes standing near the commissary entrance pretending to read newspapers. When I mentioned it to Daniel, he shrugged it off, but his shoulders stayed tense for the rest of the evening. At night, we'd meet in the observation deck overlooking the runway. The glow of aircraft lights reflected off the glass, painting us in blue and red. He said, "Do you trust anyone above us?" I wanted to say yes, but the truth was no. Trust was a luxury the military didn't issue. 1 week before the flight, my father called. "The less you know, the longer you live." That was all he said before hanging up. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. I hadn't told him about the anomalies or the mission, yet he knew. That meant Brant had spoken to him. I began to wonder how deep this went. The night before the scheduled test flight, the hangar buzzed under floodlights. Mechanics moved like ghosts, checking panels and refueling. The F-16D stood ready, sleek and silent, its new telemetry pod glowing faintly under the nose. Daniel crouched near the landing gear, running diagnostics from a tablet. He frowned, tapping the screen. The pod's ID numbers didn't match the manifest. When he scanned it, the system returned access denied. He muttered that it wasn't standard Air Force hardware. I took photos of the serial tags when no one was watching. The metal smelled of ozone, sharp and artificial. Brant arrived unexpectedly, walking the line of aircraft. His eyes stopped on us. He said something about precision and excellence, the kind of speech designed to be overheard. Then his gaze locked on Daniel. "Remember your place, Lieutenant." Daniel nodded, jaw tight. After he left, Daniel whispered, "If something happens out there, promise me you'll find out why." I wanted to laugh it off, tell him nothing would happen, but I saw the reflection of the telemetry pod in his eyes and couldn't form the words. We spent the rest of the night running simulations pretending normalcy. At 2300, he handed me a sealed envelope with my name written across it, just in case, he said. I didn't open it. The next morning dawned windless and gray. We suited up in silence. The checklist was mechanical, each step a ritual against fear. When I climbed into the cockpit, I felt a static charge crawl up my arms. The instruments glowed with digital precision, too perfect, too quiet. Ground control's voice crackled through the headset. "Recon 7, you are cleared for takeoff." The engines roared, the runway blurred, and we lifted into the clean morning sky. At 12,000 feet, Daniel adjusted the telemetry interface. The readings pulsed erratically. He frowned, saying something about external interference. I glanced at the radar. A second blip appeared, shadowing our course. I radioed base. No response. Static. Then Brant's voice cut through, calm and clear. "Continue your route, Captain. You are within parameters." My stomach turned. Daniel whispered, "That's not standard frequency." We rerouted the signal manually, but before the line stabilized, the secondary display went black. I reached for the manual override, but the controls resisted like they were being held by invisible hands. Warning lights flared. Daniel's face went pale. He shouted something I'll never forget. "They're overriding from ground control." Then came the explosion. The last thing I saw was his hand reaching for the cockpit recorder. People say near death feels like slow motion, but it doesn't. It's fast, violent, merciless. One flash of light, one soundless scream, then nothing. When I later woke in the ER, they told me it was a mechanical malfunction, that the black box data was corrupted. But 1 month earlier, I had already seen the corruption written in numbers hidden in the system I served. And now, looking back, I understand why Brant's eyes never left mine when he said, "You're overstepping." He wasn't warning me. He was measuring how much I already knew. The morning of the flight began with a silence so clear it felt like a warning. The air over Langley was heavy. No wind, no movement, just the metallic hum of engines warming on the tarmac. The sun had barely risen, and the runway glowed faintly under the sodium lights. Daniel and I suited up the checklist familiar enough to hide our nerves. Helmet, oxygen, flight computer, pre-flight log. Everything felt procedural, like we were walking through a script already written. Ground control called in Recon 7, cleared for takeoff, repeat, cleared for takeoff. The voice on the radio was calm, maybe too calm. I remember Daniel glancing at me, the kind of look you give when something feels wrong, but you can't name it. At 0603, we rolled forward. The F-16D responded smoothly, engines roaring as the runway blurred into a single streak of silver. We lifted off cleanly, climbing through low fog until the coastline spread out beneath us. On the flight log, the data streamed in perfect order: altitude, velocity, external temperature, fuel pressure. Everything stable. Then, at 0617, the telemetry spiked. A brief pulse of interference flashed across the monitor. Daniel frowned, tapping the console. "That's not from us," he said. The signal repeated a rhythmic pattern buried under the main feed. I recognized it, a remote override handshake, something reserved for base command, but our mission wasn't under that protocol. Daniel switched channels. Langley Recon 7 experiencing irregular telemetry response request verification. The reply came slower than usual. Maintain course, Captain, the voice said. We're reading stable on our end. Daniel leaned back, shaking his head. They're not seeing what I'm seeing. The static on the comms deepened. I watched the radar. A ghost blip flickered in and out, shadowing our altitude. It wasn't another aircraft, at least not any that filed flight data. It moved with us like a mirror. At 0624, Daniel's console froze. Warning lights lit the cockpit. He tried manual reset. Nothing. The radio turned to white noise, then went dead. I felt it in my chest. Before I saw it, the engines surged too hot, the control stick stiffened. The plane tilted slightly right, a movement not commanded by either of us. Daniel's voice rose steady but tense. I'm locking manual override. He pulled the lever. No response. Then a new voice came over the emergency frequency, one we weren't supposed to receive. Continue Vector Bravo, Captain Holt. Authorization Brandt. My pulse stopped. Brandt's voice, calm and deliberate, bypassing every layer of protocol. Daniel looked at me, eyes wide. Why is he on this channel? I didn't answer because I didn't know. Then, like a switch, the plane banked sharply. Warning, warning, altitude critical. Daniel fought the controls. I grabbed the auxiliary lever. The flight log flickered red across the display, cascading data strings collapsing into gibberish. It was as if someone was rewriting the code mid-flight. The horizon spun. For a second, the world was nothing but sky and sea. I heard Daniel curse short and quiet. Then came the sound metal tearing a single detonation that cracked through my chest. Everything went white. The next images are fragments burned into my mind, the canopy shattering, a flash of fire swallowing the instrument panel. Daniel's arm reaching across me, pressing the emergency eject trigger, but it jammed halfway. His voice shouting through static. They're doing it from base Reagan there, then silence. Gravity took us. The sea rose like glass reflecting the explosion above. I remember the feeling of being weightless, then the impact that shattered every sense. Darkness. When I opened my eyes again, there was no sound. Only the slow sway of water around me and the taste of blood and salt. The wreckage floated nearby, pieces of wing and carbon fiber glinting in the morning light. Daniel was still strapped in his seat, his visor cracked, his body still. I reached for him, but my hands wouldn't move. Pain anchored me. My vision blurred, fading into static like the telemetry before the crash. Then, nothing. They say trauma rewires memory. For me, it rewrote it. When I regained consciousness, fluorescent light replaced the ocean. I was in ICU tubes in my arm, a monitor counting my heartbeats. My father stood at the end of the bed, arms crossed, silent. Beside him, 2 military police officers. I tried to speak, but my throat was sandpaper. Where's Daniel? I managed. One of the officers looked away. My father's expression didn't change. He's gone. Pilot error, he said flatly. I wanted to scream that it wasn't that we'd been overridden, but the sedatives dragged me under again. Days blurred. Nurses came and went, faces I didn't recognize. Every time I woke, the same words echoed in the hallway: pilot error. The press release was issued within 48 hours. Training malfunction, pilot error, both pilots at fault. Daniel's name appeared next to mine, reduced to a line in a statement. I stared at the news on the television mounted above the bed, unable to move. The footage showed Brandt speaking at a podium. His voice was calm, remorseful even. The Air Force mourns the loss of 2 fine officers in a tragic accident. My father stood behind him. Watching the broadcast felt like drowning again, but slower this time. One afternoon, I woke to hear whispers outside the door. The doctor's voice, quiet, uncertain. Sir, she's stabilizing faster than expected. Another voice, lower, unmistakable. Keep her sedated until inquiry ends. I froze. Brandt! The words cut through the fog in my head. Keep her sedated. I waited until their footsteps faded before opening my eyes fully. The IV line led to a pump set at a steady drip. I followed it with my eyes, memorizing the dosage numbers, enough to keep me half asleep, half silent. I began pretending to be weaker than I was. Each time they checked vitals, I slowed my breathing, let my eyes flutter. At night, I counted the seconds between each monitor beep, learning its rhythm until I could predict it. I needed them to believe I was broken. The body heals slower when it wants to, but the mind learns fast. On the fifth night, a nurse with kind eyes whispered that the investigation had already concluded. "They said you panicked," she murmured. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I'd seen the override light flicker seconds before the explosion, but words caught in my throat. When she left, I turned my head toward the window. The reflection showed 2 MPs stationed outside, guarding me like a criminal. I realized then that I wasn't a survivor. I was containment. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The telemetry interference, the unauthorized channel Brandt's voice, my father's silence. They weren't trying to protect the Air Force. They were protecting themselves. Sleep came in flashes, haunted by the image of Daniel's final glance. In one dream, he was still alive, standing in the hangar, holding the envelope I never opened. When I reached for him, he faded, replaced by the echo of that voice on the radio. "Continue Vector Bravo. Authorization Brandt." The next morning, my father came alone. He dismissed the guards with a nod. For a moment, I thought he might say something human. Instead, he adjusted his uniform, eyes fixed on the floor. "You will not discuss this with anyone, Reagan. The inquiry is closed." I asked, what did they find? His jaw tightened. "Nothing of relevance." I said Daniel's telemetry showed an external override. His gaze lifted, then cold steel. "You will forget that detail." He turned to leave. I said quietly, "What did you trade for their silence?" He paused at the door, but didn't answer. When he left, I finally understood what Brandt had meant when he told me I was overstepping. I hadn't just uncovered numbers. I'd touched the machinery that made men like him untouchable. For the next 2 weeks, I played the obedient patient, pretending the sedatives worked, pretending I didn't see the same agents reviewing my chart every night. I stored strength in fragments, one slow breath at a time, one plan forming in the dark. I knew that somewhere the black box from Recon 7 still existed, and that if Brandt had it, he'd erase every trace of override command. But Daniel had been meticulous. He never trusted a single system. The real proof would be wherever he kept his backups, and the only clue I had was in the note 142B. The crash was over, but the wreckage had just begun. That night, as the storm rolled across the Virginia coast, lightning flashed through the window, reflecting in the IV tube like a pulse. I made a promise to the dark I would find 142B. I would find the truth. And when I did, no one wearing those stars on their shoulders would ever sleep easily again. The rain came down like static the night I left the hospital. Each drop hit the asphalt with the same rhythm as the monitors that had kept me alive. I waited until the hallway lights dimmed to maintenance mode the hour when even the guards grew tired. The IV needle was gone. I'd removed it earlier that day, replacing it with a strip of medical tape to hide the puncture. I wore the same flight jacket that had been returned with my personal effects. Its smell, jet fuel, and salt still clung to me like a ghost. I slipped past the nurse's station, every step rehearsed in my head. The exit doors opened with a hiss, and the Virginia air hit me cold and metallic. Outside, the base floodlights cut through the rain in narrow beams. I moved between them, one shadow among many, until I reached the service gate. The guard post was empty except for a radio playing country music under a flickering bulb. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stole a maintenance jeep parked nearby, the keys still in the ignition. 20 minutes later, I was driving toward Norfolk windshield wipers fighting the downpour. The road stretched empty, reflecting the glow of passing headlights. My ribs ached, but adrenaline overruled pain. The address from Daniel's note replayed in my mind, 142B, nothing more. It could have been a locker, a warehouse, or a grave. The industrial park appeared through the fog rows of metal storage units glistening under floodlights. Most were locked behind chain-link fences, their numbered doors identical. I parked behind an abandoned semi, killed the engine, and waited. The rain softened, replaced by the distant hum of freight trains. The lock on 142B was old but intact. I tried the combination that Daniel had once joked about our flight number, 716. The latch clicked open on the first try. The door groaned upward, metal scraping against metal, the sound echoing through the night. Inside, the air smelled of dust and machine oil. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, flickering weakly. I expected clutter boxes, maybe flight gear. Instead, there was almost nothing. Just a small metal table at the center of the room, and on it, a half-burned flight bag. Its fabric was scorched edges melted into hardened curls. Beside it lay a military-grade hard drive sealed in a static case. My heart stuttered. The tag read, "Property of Langley AFB, Classified Material." I closed the door behind me, shutting out the rain. The silence inside was thick, heavy with memory. I opened the flight bag first. The zipper stuck halfway rusted from seawater. Inside were fragments of a pilot's manual, a broken wristwatch stopped at 0629, and a photograph curled from heat. It showed Daniel and me standing near the hangar months ago, sunlight flaring across the lens. Someone had drawn a red X through it. My breath caught. Underneath the photo was a small flashcard labeled PHX. The initials meant nothing at first. Then I saw the hard drive again and the label on its side, Project Phoenix. My fingers shook as I connected the drive to the portable reader Daniel had left in the bag. The screen came alive with a folder tree, dozens of files, each time-stamped around the date of the crash. Video archives, transaction logs, internal memos. The first file opened automatically, a grainy feed from a security camera inside a conference room. The date read April 9th, 2022, 2 weeks before the flight. The footage showed General Marcus Brandt seated at the head of a table, uniform immaculate. Beside him, my father. The camera angle caught their faces clearly. Between them lay a folder stamped Asset Disposal Authorization. Brandt's voice was crisp. "Operation Phoenix proceeds under full clearance. The asset has fulfilled its purpose." My father replied, "And the pilot's collateral if necessary. We control the narrative." I froze. Collateral. My throat tightened, air burning through my lungs. They spoke for several minutes more, discussing logistics data redirection and funding channels through medevac research. Every word peeled away the last layer of illusion. The crash hadn't been an accident, it had been execution by procedure. When the video ended, the screen went black for a moment, then displayed a single line of text, Phoenix Protocol active. Beneath it was a list of coordinates, one matching the flight path Daniel and I had taken. My stomach turned. The telemetry override had been preloaded into the system before we even left the ground. I scrolled further, finding an email draft from Brandt to a civilian contractor. The subject line read, "Decommission Notice. Project Phoenix." The body said simply, "Ensure data containment. Holt's daughter will not compromise integrity." My name buried in bureaucracy. My father's signature below, approving it. The betrayal hit in waves, professional, personal, generational. I sat on the cold concrete laptop light, reflecting off the tears I hadn't realized were there. For years, I'd believed obedience kept us safe. That loyalty was the highest form of love. But sitting there staring at proof that my father had signed off on my death, I understood obedience was just a convenient weapon. I copied everything from the drive onto a new USB, the same one Daniel had hidden in my jacket. Outside, thunder rolled closer, shaking the metal walls. The flickering bulb dimmed, then steadied. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps. I froze, listening. Only rain. Still, I turned off the device and slipped it back into the bag. If they knew Daniel had kept this, they would have searched every inch of his life, maybe even this place. The fact that it remained untouched meant only one thing. Someone high up wanted it forgotten, not destroyed. I stepped back into the rain, closing the door until it latched. The drive felt heavy in my pocket, heavier than truth should. I sat in the Jeep for a long time before starting the engine. The wipers struggled against the downpour. Every flash of lightning illuminated the path ahead like a camera shutter. My mind replayed the footage again and again. Brandt's composed tone, my father's calm assent. Collateral if necessary. I whispered the words aloud, testing how they sounded in my own voice. They tasted like iron. By the time I reached the outskirts of the base, dawn had begun to push through the clouds. The city lights faded behind me, replaced by the gray wash of morning. I parked near the shoreline, facing the ocean that had swallowed Daniel. For a long time, I just sat there listening to the waves collide with the rocks. In the reflection on the windshield, I saw myself not as a soldier, but as evidence, living proof of what they'd tried to erase. I opened Daniel's old envelope at last. Inside was a single note written in his quick, uneven script. "If you find this, it means I failed to stop them. Don't let them finish Phoenix. Trust no one above Voss." The name stirred memory. Major Karen Voss, legal officer friend of my mother. I hadn't seen her in years. Daniel must have reached out to her before the crash. Maybe she was his backup plan. I folded the note carefully and tucked it inside my jacket. The storm eased to drizzle, the kind that lingers after truth breaks open. I realized how quiet it had become. The silence was no longer comforting. It was accusatory. The city would soon wake. The news would still call it a training malfunction, and Brandt would probably stand in another press briefing pretending to mourn. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Betrayal piled on betrayal, each layer colder than the last. Yet beneath it, something new began to take shape. Not rage, not grief, but focus. The kind my father had always demanded but never understood. Precision detached and absolute. If they wanted me silent, I would make the silence speak. I drove back toward Langley, mind-tracing every step between that video and the world outside. Operation Phoenix wasn't just a cover-up. It was a machine built to recycle guilt, to destroy evidence and rebuild stories until they fit the narrative. And now I had the code to break it. As the base perimeter lights appeared in the distance, I felt the shift inside me the exact moment victim turned investigator. Daniel's death was no longer an accident to mourn. It was a fact to prove. And once proven, it would become a weapon sharper than any order my father had ever given. The house in Arlington hadn't changed since the last time I'd been inside it. The lawn was still perfectly trimmed, the flag still lit by a floodlight even in the rain, and the front porch still smelled faintly of varnish and control. I parked across the street and watched the curtains move. He was home. Colonel Robert Holt never left a light on without reason. Every window glowed evenly, like the house itself was standing at attention. For a moment, I sat there with the engine idling, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my palms hurt. Then I killed the ignition and stepped into the drizzle. The gravel crunched under my boots too loud in the stillness. I knocked once. The door opened before my hand fell back to my side. He must have been waiting. His posture was perfect uniform, pressed no tie. He looked exactly as he had at my mother's funeral, composed, unreadable, the living embodiment of protocol. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You should be resting." I walked past him into the house. The smell of coffee and furniture polish hit me like déjà vu. Every photo frame was aligned on the mantel, every book arranged by height. Nothing human was out of place. "You knew," I said, quietly. "About Brandt. About Phoenix." His eyes didn't move. "You need to stop this paranoia before it ruins what's left of your career." I laughed at the sound, sharp and unfamiliar in that room. My career. "You and Brandt already signed my death certificate." His expression cracked a small twitch near his jaw. "Watch your tone. I saw the footage," I said, pulling the USB from my pocket. "I saw you sign the authorization." The air between us thickened. He turned away, walked to the cabinet, and poured himself a drink. The sound of ice against glass filled the silence. "You don't understand how things work," he said finally. "You were never meant to." "Explain it to me then," I said. "Explain why my name was in that file, why Daniel died, why you stood beside Brandt while he called it an accident." He downed the whiskey in one motion, then slammed the glass on the counter. "Because that's how the system survives. Someone has to protect it from idealists like you." I felt my hands shake, not from fear, but from fury I'd buried for years. "You mean protect yourself?" He turned, voice rising. "I built this family's name with discipline. You'd destroy it over one mistake." "A mistake?" The word burned. "You helped kill your own daughter's crew to hide a program you couldn't control." He stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Enough." "No," I said louder. "You destroyed everything you wanted to protect." The words came out like an exhale I'd held since childhood. His hand moved before I could step back. The slap cracked across my cheek, clean and deliberate. For a moment, the world went white, then silence. My ears rang. He stood there breathing hard, the same stance he used to take on the firing range, measured, composed after impact. "You will not speak to me like that," he said. "You're still my daughter." I touched my cheek, felt the heat blooming beneath the skin. "Not anymore." He turned away, shoulders stiff. "You think exposing Brant will fix this? You'll only destroy yourself." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You already did that for me." He faced me again, eyes colder than I'd ever seen. "You have no idea how deep this goes. Phoenix was designed to save lives." "Whose?" I asked. "Yours." He didn't answer. The glass on the counter trembled under his grip. He poured another drink, but didn't touch it. "You think you're fighting corruption," he said. "What you're really doing is feeding it. They'll twist you until you're just another cautionary tale. I'd rather be a cautionary tale than your shadow." His shoulders slumped, the first sign of age I'd ever seen on him. For a moment, he looked almost human. "I wanted to protect you," he said. "From the truth. From this." "No," I said softly. "You wanted to control me." "There's a difference." The storm outside grew louder, wind rattling the windows. I looked around the room, the awards, the medals, the perfectly framed certificates, each one a monument to a man who valued obedience more than love. "When did you stop being a father?" I asked. "The day she died," he said without hesitation. "Your mother was the last good thing I had. After that, all I could do was make sure you didn't make the same mistakes. By turning me into you." He didn't deny it. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The rain beat harder against the glass, thunder rolling across the sky. Finally, I said, "I'm going to expose Phoenix." He shook his head. "You won't survive it." "Maybe not, but you won't either." I turned to leave. His voice followed me. "Reagan, listen to me." I stopped at the doorway. "You think Brant is the villain? He's just a symptom. The disease is older than both of us." "Then it's time someone names it." His hand clenched around the glass. I heard it shatter, the sound slicing through the air like a final punctuation. "You walk out that door," he said, "and you're no longer my daughter." I looked back at him standing in a mess he'd just created, shards glittering at his feet. "You made that choice the day you signed that paper." His face tightened, but he didn't move. I walked out into the rain. It was colder now, cutting against my skin. The slap still burned, but the pain felt clean, different from before. For the first time in years, it belonged to me. I reached the car and looked back once. The house stood silent, its windows glowing with artificial warmth. Behind those walls was a man who'd traded his soul for order and a daughter who'd finally learned what freedom sounded like. The thunder rolled again, louder this time, echoing across the empty street. I whispered to the storm not as prayer, but as vow. "I will expose everything." The rain swallowed my words, carrying them into the night. As I drove away, the reflection of the house faded in the mirror until it was just another light lost in the distance. Somewhere between Arlington and Langley, the fear I'd carried for years dissolved into something sharper. Resolve. The kind my father had once admired but never recognized in me. I touched the bruise on my cheek and smiled without joy. It would fade, but the truth would not. I pressed harder on the accelerator, the road ahead lit by streaks of lightning. The victim was gone. The soldier remained. Major Karen Voss lived 2 hours south of D.C. in a brick townhouse with no name on the mailbox and no rank on the door. She had retired from the Judge Advocate General's office 3 years earlier after a career that made her both respected and quietly feared. My mother had once served under her in an administrative unit. They had remained close until the accident that took her life. Daniel's note had said to trust no one above Voss. So that's where I went. It was late afternoon when she opened the door wearing jeans and an old navy sweatshirt. Her hair was silver now, cropped short. For a moment, she looked at me without recognition, then her expression softened. "You look like your mother," she said. The words almost broke me. I stepped inside, and the smell of coffee hit me a civilian kind of comfort I hadn't known in years. "You shouldn't be here," she said once the door was shut. "You're under surveillance." "I know," I said, "but Daniel Pierce left something for me. Something I can't decode alone." I handed her the USB. She turned it over in her palm, eyes narrowing. "This better not get me court-martialed post-retirement." "Only if we fail," I said. She smiled faintly. Spoken like a Holt. We spent hours in her home office surrounded by law books and outdated computer monitors. Voss connected the USB to an air-gapped system she kept for sensitive cases. The screen flickered to life, rows of encrypted files appearing like constellations. She whistled softly. Whoever did this knew what they were hiding. "Daniel," I said. "He found evidence of money moving through the Medivac research division. It looked like a front for something else." Voss began typing, her fingers surprisingly quick. "That program was under Brandt's oversight, wasn't it?" I nodded. "Then this goes higher than him," she muttered. As the decryption software ran, we sat in silence. The rain outside turned to snowflakes drifting against the window. I felt the fatigue of weeks catch up to me. "My father's involved," I said finally. She stopped typing. "Robert." I nodded. "He signed off on an authorization document called Operation Phoenix. It tied directly to our crash." Voss leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "Your mother once told me he'd burn down the world if he thought it would keep you safe." "He didn't keep me safe," I said. "He kept me silent." The computer beeped. Decryption complete. Folders unfolded across the screen, emails, transaction reports, voice logs, even scanned handwritten memos. Voss clicked open one labeled Internal Transfer Summary. The numbers were staggering. Tens of millions routed through civilian contractors under humanitarian pretenses, redirected to offshore accounts. Each transaction carried a project code beginning with PHX. "Phoenix again," Voss said. "They were laundering funds through medical evacuations, patients that never existed." She scrolled further. The signature at the bottom of the authorization page was unmistakable: General Marcus Brandt, the co-signer Colonel Robert Holt. I stared at the screen until the lines blurred. "They killed Daniel because he found this," I whispered. Voss looked at me, her expression grim. "If that's true, you need to get these files off any network. Someone will come looking. Then we go analog," I said. "Print document, distribute later." She nodded approvingly. "Your mother would have liked you. We worked through the night." By dawn, we had compiled a binder thick with evidence, flight manifests, altered budgets, and one chilling memo from Brandt himself. It read, "Proceed with decommission of Recon 7 data systems. Pierce flagged inconsistencies. Contain breach before dissemination." The date was 2 days before the crash. I felt the air leave my lungs. He'd planned it in advance. "He ordered the crash," I said quietly. They replaced the telemetry pods to trigger remote override. Voss rubbed her temples. "You'll need proof beyond this if you want it to hold in court. A confession, a surviving witness, something solid. Then I'll find one." That's how I met Sergeant Elijah Cross. He was a radar technician stationed at Langley who'd handled the tracking data for our flight. I remembered his name from the maintenance logs. Voss arranged a quiet meeting through one of her old contacts. We met in the back of a mechanic's garage near the base perimeter. Cross was younger than I expected, barely 30, eyes sharp but cautious. He wore civilian clothes and kept glancing toward the door. "You know they monitor everyone who was near that flight?" he said. "You talk to me, you risk the same." I handed him a photo from the crash site. "You were on duty when this plane went down. I need the radar data from that morning." He hesitated. "It was confiscated. By Hugh Brandt's people. They said national security. The next day, the system logs were wiped." "You made backups," I said. He looked at me surprised. "How did you—" "Because if you didn't, you wouldn't have agreed to meet me." He exhaled and nodded. "They don't know about the mirror drive. I copied the logs before they cleaned the servers." He pulled a flash drive from his jacket and placed it on the table. "But if they trace this back to me—" "They won't," I said. "You're not the only one they underestimated." Back at Voss's house, we reviewed the radar data. It confirmed everything the moment of telemetry interference. the external override signature and the shutdown sequence originating from base command. The metadata listed an authorization code, BRNT142. Voss looked at me. Brandt himself triggered the override. The realization was both satisfying and sickening. We had proof of murder disguised as malfunction, but evidence was only as powerful as the people willing to believe it. If we go public now, Voss warned, they'll label you unstable, discredit the data, and bury this under classification. Then we make them listen, I said. Not in a courtroom, in front of everyone. You're talking exposure, she said. Livestream press the whole thing. Exactly. Voss studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Your mother would call this madness. I call it courage. The next week was a blur of preparation. Cross provided technical schematics of the telemetry pods showing how they'd been modified to allow remote control. Voss drafted legal summaries in case we needed whistleblower protection. I organized the files into layers: financial corruption, operational sabotage, personal betrayal. The pattern was clear. Brandt funneled money through fake medical projects, covered his trail with classified missions, and eliminated anyone who got too close. Daniel had tried to report it. The crash had silenced him. And now, with Voss and Cross, I had a team small enough to stay invisible, but skilled enough to expose the entire operation. We met in safe houses, coffee shops, anywhere ordinary. We used burner phones, no emails, no digital traces. Each time we uncovered something new, the risk grew. Once, while driving back from a meeting, I noticed a black SUV following at a steady distance. When I turned down a side street, it turned too. I parked at a gas station and waited. The SUV idled a moment, then drove off. Voss said it was intimidation. I said it was confirmation. By the second week, we had everything we needed: Brandt's memo, the override logs, the transfer records. Voss looked at me over the stack of papers. Once this leaves our hands, there's no going back. There's nothing to go back to, I said. She smiled faintly. Then, let's make it count. That night, we burned duplicate copies and sealed the originals in 3 envelopes labeled for major media outlets. One would be sent anonymously. The others I'd carry myself. Before we parted, Voss handed me a small badge from her old uniform. For luck, she said. It didn't help me much, but maybe it'll help you. I tucked it into my pocket next to Daniel's note. As I drove away, I glanced at the rearview mirror and saw her watching from the doorway, arms crossed like a mother sending her child to war. The snow had stopped, leaving the streets slick and quiet. I thought about Daniel, about the look on his face before the crash, the way he said I sounded like my father. He was wrong. I didn't sound like him anymore. The investigation had changed something fundamental in me. I no longer wanted to survive quietly. I wanted the truth to make noise. The Senate committee never replied. Not to the documents, not to the evidence, not to the letter I'd written in the language they respected most: rank precision proof. 2 weeks after we sent the files, the only acknowledgement was silence. Voss called it bureaucratic cowardice. I called it complicity. That silence became the final push. I decided if they wouldn't listen in closed chambers, I'd make them listen where no door could shut me out. The Air Force scheduled a memorial for Daniel Pierce at Langley Airfield, an official service honoring his sacrifice during a training malfunction. It would be live-streamed nationwide broadcast on the military network. They wanted a grieving co-pilot to stand as a symbol of resilience. They didn't realize they'd invited a witness. I arrived early, dressed in uniform. The same ribbons they'd once pinned on me for obedience now felt like shackles. The hangar had been converted into a ceremony, space flags draped across the rafters, chairs, aligned with perfect symmetry. Cameras stood at every angle, red lights blinking. I saw Brandt near the podium, shaking hands with officials, the picture of composure. My father was there too, sitting in the front row, eyes fixed forward. Neither looked in my direction. That suited me fine. Voss sat in the back in civilian clothes, pretending to be just another guest. Elijah Cross stood near the technical booth, ready with the signal. Everything we needed was in place. At precisely 1100 hours, the ceremony began. A chaplain spoke first, followed by a colonel reading from a prepared statement. When they called my name, my heart slowed. I stepped up to the podium, the microphone amplifying the faint tremor in my breath. The cameras focused. The livestream counter ticked upward, thousands watching. Captain Reagan Holt, the announcer said, "Survivor of the Recon 7 incident here to honor Lieutenant Daniel Pierce." I looked out across the sea of uniforms and civilian faces. "Thank you," I began, voice steady. Daniel was more than my co-pilot. He was the reason I'm standing here at all. I paused, letting the words hang. But the truth is he shouldn't have died. A ripple of confusion moved through the audience. Brant's expression tightened. "We've all been told the crash was caused by equipment malfunction," I continued. "But that's not true." The silence deepened. Somewhere in the back, a camera operator hesitated, unsure whether to keep rolling. I glanced toward Cross. He gave a small nod. The main screen behind me flickered to life, displaying the first video file from Storage Unit 142B, the grainy footage of Brant and my father signing the authorization. Gasps spread through the crowd. Brant took one step forward. "Captain, that material is classified." "General Brant, authorized false telemetry override," I said, clearly cutting through his protest. Those were his words. "You can hear them yourself." The second file began to play, the voice log recovered from the flight. My voice, Daniel's voice, then the interference, and finally Brant's unmistakable tone. "Continue Vector Bravo authorization, Brant." The sound filled the hangar. The audience froze. Reporters leaned forward. The truth was no longer rumor. It was voice and data and proof. Brant moved toward the stage, but security hesitated. No one wanted to be the one to silence a whistleblower on live broadcast. "These men killed my co-pilot," I said. "They used Operation Phoenix to launder millions through fake medical evacuations, and when Daniel Pierce discovered it, they made sure he wouldn't speak." My father stood now, eyes locked on me. For a second, I saw something flicker in his expression, not anger, not even guilt, but fear. "Colonel Holt," I said, addressing him directly. "Did you think loyalty meant silence? Did you think signing your daughter's death order would protect the system?" He said nothing. The microphones caught the collective intake of breath from the audience. I turned back to the crowd. For years, I believed the Air Force stood for integrity, for truth, for honor. But honor doesn't hide behind closed doors. It doesn't silence the people who die for it. I looked into the nearest camera. This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. Behind me, the screen displayed the financial records, the medevac transactions, the fake accounts, the signatures. Cross had done his job perfectly. Every slide hit like artillery. Voss watched from the back, tears in her eyes. Brant shouted something about national security, but the words drowned under the murmurs of the crowd. Officers exchanged looks, reporters whispered into microphones. The livestream comment feed exploded online, thousands of viewers reacting in real time. The hangar, once a monument to order, had become a courtroom. "You used to tell me to serve the flag," I said, looking at my father. "I am." I stepped away from the podium, leaving the microphone open. Brant tried to approach, but MPs intercepted him, uncertain which orders to follow. For the first time, his authority cracked. His voice rose desperate. "Cut the feed." But Cross had already locked the system. The broadcast continued unbroken. The screen zoomed in on the final frame of the video, Brant's signature beside the phrase, "Asset Disposal Authorization." The hangar erupted. Some officers stood in stunned silence. Others began making calls. I walked past my father. He reached for my arm, his hand trembling. "Reagan," he said softly, "don't do this." I looked at him, the man who had once taught me precision as the highest virtue. "You already did." He let his hand fall. As I left the stage, a reporter shouted, "Captain Holt, what happens now?" I turned briefly toward the cameras. Now the truth flies on its own. The image froze the feed still running. Within minutes, every major network picked up the story. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed with notifications, headlines, mentions, questions. Brant's face was already trending, his name paired with words like scandal, corruption, and treason. The sound of helicopters echoed overhead, news crews rushing in. I looked back at the hangar, its massive doors still open. For once, the air felt clean. I found Voss near the back exit. "You did it," she said. "We did," I corrected. She smiled. "You realize they'll come for you now." "They already have," I said. "Now it's my turn." We walked to the car as sirens wailed in the distance. MPs swarmed the area, not sure whether to arrest or protect anyone. The entire system had been caught off guard by the very loyalty it tried to suppress. When I glanced at my reflection in the car window, I didn't see the soldier who'd followed orders. I saw the woman who'd finally given one to the truth itself. I turned to the camera, still following from afar, invisible but ever present, and spoke not to the reporters, not to the brass, but to whoever still believed the powerful could bury justice. If you were in that crowd, would you believe her or the general comment below? A week after the broadcast, the Air Force was in flames. The Pentagon launched an internal investigation before breakfast the next morning. By noon, congressional hearings were announced. Overnight, every headline in America carried the same two words, Phoenix Protocol. General Marcus Brandt's face dominated every network feed, his medals, his denials, his silence. The footage from the memorial played on endless loops. Each time the audio clip of his voice saying, "Authorization Brandt" hit the air, another layer of his power peeled away. My father was stripped of his honors 2 days later. The official phrasing read, "Revocation of distinction due to ethical misconduct." The man who once measured pride in silver stars now lived in quiet disgrace. I didn't feel triumph. I felt inevitability. Truth has a strange gravity. It pulls everything down eventually. I moved temporarily to Virginia Beach into a rented apartment facing the gray Atlantic. I needed distance from Langley, from D.C., from ghosts. The ocean became my clock. Morning waves, afternoon silence, night wind. I kept my uniform folded in a drawer, the badge Voss had given me resting on top. I thought maybe after everything peace might finally take root. But peace doesn't last long when the powerful begin to drown. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Brandt walked into the cafe. I saw his reflection in the glass before I saw him in the room. No uniform this time, just a tailored gray suit that fit him like a lie. His hair was thinner, the deep calm in his posture replaced by tension coiled beneath the surface. He carried himself like a man who had rehearsed control but forgotten the lines. He didn't order anything. Just walked straight to my table. "Captain Holt," he said softly, as if names could reset history. I didn't stand. "General." The word left my mouth stripped of respect, a formality only. He glanced around, lowering his voice. "May I sit?" "You already are," I said. He leaned forward, hands clasped. "You've made quite a storm." "I didn't make anything I said. I revealed what was already there." He sighed. "You think exposing me will fix anything? You've just handed the press a weapon they don't understand. The military's reputation isn't my responsibility anymore," I said, cutting him off. "You built a system that valued image over integrity. Now it's collapsing under its own weight." His jaw tightened. "Do you even know what Phoenix was meant to achieve?" I said nothing. He continued, voice lower. "It wasn't greed. It was strategy. We were funneling resources into covert development projects. The medical research front was a necessity classified allocation. You killed 2 pilots," I said, voice sharp as a blade. "That's not allocation. That's execution." His eyes flashed. "Collateral damage," he said, then immediately regretted it. The phrase hung in the air like poison. "You're quoting your own defense," I said. "You sound like every man who's ever believed the end justified the corpse count." He looked away, fingers drumming on the table. "You're naive, Captain. The world doesn't work on truth. It works on leverage. And now you have none," I said, "which means this meeting isn't about explanation. It's about survival." He gave a humorless laugh. "You always were sharp." Then he lowered his voice further. "Help me clean this up, Captain. I can still save your career. You testify that you misunderstood the data, that you acted under emotional distress. They'll forgive you. You'll be reinstated." We both walk away. I studied him for a long moment. The same man who once signed my flight orders, who'd ordered my silence through morphine, was now bargaining like a politician caught in his own snare. "You still think this is about careers," I said. "I'm done serving lies." His expression shifted something between disbelief and pity. "You think they'll protect you now? You're expendable. They'll turn on you the second you're no longer useful." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I won't have to look in the mirror and see you." He reached across the table hand hovering over mine. Reagan, listen. You don't know what's coming. The real people behind Phoenix, they won't stop with me. I pulled my hand back, the movement slow, deliberate. Then they'll learn the same lesson you did. The truth doesn't negotiate. His eyes hardened. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw the man beneath the one who'd built empires on manipulation and paperwork. He stood, straightened his jacket composure, returning like a reflex. You're making a mistake, he said. I've survived worse than scandal. Not this one, I said. This one has your voice. He hesitated, then turned to leave. As he reached the door, I said quietly, You know what the difference is between us. General, you fought to control the system. I fought to end it. He didn't respond. He stepped outside into the blinding sunlight. I watched through the window as the world he once commanded closed in. The cafe faced the main street where reporters had been staking out for days. The moment he appeared, microphones swarmed, cameras flashed, the questions came like artillery. General Brandt, are the allegations true? Did you authorize Operation Phoenix? Did you manipulate telemetry data that caused 2 pilots' deaths? He tried to push through, but the crowd tightened. The sound of shutters and voices mixed into chaos. I saw him raise a hand to block the glare, the same hand that once held my fate in its grip. For a moment, I felt something almost like pity. Then I remembered Daniel's last words through static, and it vanished. His SUV pulled up black and polished. He reached for the door, but a reporter stepped in front asking the question none of his press conferences had ever allowed. General, do you have anything to say to Captain Holt? He froze. For one heartbeat, I thought he might turn toward the window toward me. He didn't. He got into the SUV. The door slammed shut. Cameras reflected off the tinted glass as the vehicle pulled away, disappearing into traffic. The cafe grew quiet again, the kind of silence that follows storms. I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the window, where his face had just been. Voss texted a single line minutes later. He's finished. Federal investigators just froze his accounts. I typed back. Then justice started paying its debts. I closed my phone and leaned back. Outside, the sun began to set, casting the beach in amber light. The tide was rising steady and relentless. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe without the taste of fear. The fall of Brandt didn't erase what had been lost, but it ended what had been allowed to continue. As I left the cafe, the bell above the door chimed softly. Reporters still lingered across the street, chasing what remained of a story already written. I walked past them unnoticed. In the distance, I could see the ocean, the same horizon Daniel and I had flown over one last time. The waves were endless, their rhythm indifferent to secrets or ranks. I whispered to the wind, You finished it, Daniel. Then I kept walking, not as a soldier, not as a survivor, but as something freer than either. By the time the headlines stabilized, America already had a new scandal to feed on. Air Force corruption exposed was everywhere. CNN, Fox, The Washington Post. Every station ran the same clip, my voice at the memorial, Brandt's face caught between authority and panic, and the voice log echoing Authorization Brandt. They called it the biggest breach of military ethics since the Cold War. For the first time in decades, the institution I had grown up worshiping was on trial, not in a courtroom, but in the public conscience. For weeks, I watched from the sidelines as the investigation turned into a spectacle. There were hearings, subpoenas, and press conferences filled with polished outrage. But underneath the noise, something real was shifting. For once, the powerful were the ones answering questions. The Senate Committee on Armed Services convened a special inquiry. Voss was called as a consultant. I was listed as Holt 29, an anonymous witness, though anonymity in Washington was a fragile illusion. I sat in a soundproof room behind a tinted screen, my testimony transmitted to the committee through a voice filter. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had spent months trying to silence me, and now they had to listen to every word. State your role in the events of April 2022, the chairman asked. My voice came through steady. Captain Reagan Holt, U.S. Air Force Intelligence. Co-pilot Recon 7 test flight. Survivor. The questioning lasted for hours. They played the recordings, displayed the documents, dissected every decision I had made, but the data spoke louder than politics. The telemetry override logs the financial transfers, the internal memos, all irrefutable. When they reached the footage of Brant and my father signing the authorization, the room fell silent. You could hear the hum of the projectors, the weight of realization pressing against the walls. "Did you know your father's involvement before the crash?" they asked. "No," I said, but I suspected afterward. The silence told me everything. The committee thanked me for my service, their voices measured and sterile. I knew that tone. It was the sound of bureaucracy trying to disguise guilt. A week later, the court-martial proceedings began. Brant stood trial first. The courtroom was packed, officers, reporters, even veterans who had flown under his command. He looked smaller without his stars. Just another man in a suit pretending authority still belonged to him. The prosecutor played the same voice log I had leaked to the world. When Brant heard his own words, "Continue, Vector Bravo, authorization, Brant," he closed his eyes, jaw tightening. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. The evidence was too clean, too complete. The defense tried to argue national security, claiming Project Phoenix was a classified initiative for advanced telemetry testing. But the money trail told a different story: offshore accounts, shell companies' millions siphoned from humanitarian aid budgets. At one point, the judge asked if he had anything to say in his defense. Brant looked straight ahead and said, "Loyalty sometimes requires sacrifice." The judge replied, "So does justice." The verdict came after only 3 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy, corruption, negligent homicide. Sentenced to 20 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release. When they let him out in handcuffs, the cameras clicked like rain. He didn't look back. My father's hearing came next. It was quieter, more contained. No cameras, no press. Just the echoes of duty and disappointment filling the room. He sat at the defense table, uniform stripped of insignia. I sat across the aisle, watching the man who had built my world unravel it with his silence. The prosecutor asked if he had anything to say about his role in the authorization of Operation Phoenix. He remained still. Colonel Holt, the judge, said, "This is your opportunity to speak." He raised his eyes just once, and for a second I saw the same steel that had defined my childhood. Then he looked away. No statement, he said. The court found him guilty of dereliction of duty and ethical misconduct. His pension revoked, his record expunged from honor rolls. There was no prison sentence, just the slow erosion of reputation, which for him was a fate worse than confinement. When the verdict was read, I expected to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. Justice, I realized, rarely looks like triumph. It looks like aftermath. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Questions flew like shrapnel. "Captain Holt, how does it feel to expose your own father? Do you think the Air Force can recover?" I said nothing. Voss stepped between us, shielding me from the cameras. "She's done her part," she said firmly. "Now let her live." But living wasn't simple. Every street corner, every news segment carried fragments of my name. Some called me a hero, others a traitor. Letters arrived at the apartment, some filled with gratitude, others with venom. I learned quickly that truth doesn't unite people. It divides them cleanly down the center. A month after Brant's conviction, I submitted my resignation. The Air Force accepted it immediately. "You'll be discharged with honors," the officer said, avoiding my eyes. "Given the circumstances." I nodded. "Circumstances built by the same people you still salute." He didn't answer. On my last day, I stood in the locker room staring at my uniform. The fabric held memories like scars, every mission, every order, every silence. I folded it carefully and left it on the bench. The locker door shut with a metallic echo that sounded like an ending. Outside, the sky over Langley was clear for once. No rain, no fog, just sunlight stretching over the tarmac. I walked along the runway, the same one Daniel and I had taken off from that final morning. I imagined his voice beside me, teasing calm, alive. "You ready to prove them wrong?" he'd said then. This time, I answered aloud. We did. Voss met me at the gate with 2 cups of coffee. "So," she said, handing me one. "Civilian life." "Feels strange," I said. "Strange is good. It means you're still capable of surprise." "You think the system will change?" I asked. She looked at the horizon. slowly, if at all. But now it knows someone's watching. That's enough for me. We stood in silence for a while, then she reached into her bag and handed me a sealed envelope. "It's from the committee," she said. "Final report." I opened it. Inside was a single page summarizing the inquiry findings. One line caught my eye. Captain Reagan Holt acted in accordance with conscience and integrity, preserving the honor of the United States Air Force. I laughed softly. They used the word honor again. "Maybe they're trying to remember what it means," Voss said. I slipped the letter into my pocket. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Fly," I said simply. "Just not for them." She smiled. "Then that's the best kind of service." That night, I drove to the Outer Banks. The air smelled of salt and rain. The ocean stretched infinite dark but alive. I carried with me Daniel's badge, my resignation letter, and a handful of sand from the crash site I'd collected months earlier. I let it fall into the tide. "You can rest now," I whispered. Behind me, the wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of jets from Langley. Somewhere up there, the sky kept moving, unbothered, unbroken. I watched until the stars began to appear sharp and clear, each one proof that light can survive anything. 6 months later, the sky looked different. Not safer, not softer, just more honest. I lived in Richmond now, in a small apartment above an aviation school near the river. Every morning before dawn, I'd walk across the tarmac to the hangar, smell the oil and metal, feel the vibration of engines waking from sleep. Teaching civilians to fly wasn't glamorous, but it was clean. No ranks, no salutes, no orders disguised as promises. My students came from every background, retirees chasing bucket lists, teenagers chasing freedom, business travelers chasing control. I taught them the same lesson every first day. The sky doesn't care who you are, only how you fly. They laughed, but they learned fast. In flight, there's no ego, only gravity and grace. I liked that. It made sense in a way the military never did. My name still circulated online occasionally, though the noise had faded. A few articles marked the anniversary of the Phoenix scandal, always pairing my photo with words like whistleblower or hero. I never read past the headlines. Labels were just another kind of uniform, and I'd taken mine off for good. One afternoon after class, I found an email waiting from Voss. The subject line read, "They finally cleared Daniel's name." I opened it slowly. The message was short, typical of her. "Pierce officially exonerated. Flight report amended to reflect sabotage. His family will receive full honors. Thought you'd want to know." K. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Cleared. Honors. Words that should have come too late, but somehow didn't. For the first time since that day over the Atlantic, I felt a release, not dramatic, not cinematic, just a quiet uncoiling somewhere beneath my ribs. I forwarded the message to myself, not to share, but to keep. Proof that truth, however late, had found its way home. That weekend, I drove east toward the Outer Banks. The road curved through pine forests and open fields before surrendering to the sea. I stopped at a small beach near Nag's Head, far from tourists and noise. The wind was cold sharp with salt. I carried a small urn in my hands, Daniel's ashes delivered months ago after the inquiry closed. His family had given me permission to take them where he'd wanted to go. The ocean stretched endless gray and alive, the same horizon we'd flown toward on that final morning. I walked to the edge of the surf, the tide licking at my boots, and knelt. "We did it," I said softly. "You finished what you started." The waves answered with their own language, eternal and indifferent. I opened the urn and let the ashes drift out. The wind caught them, scattering light across the water like dust turning into dawn. I watched until nothing remained but ripples. For a long time, I stood there listening to the rhythm of waves, to the silence between gusts. It was the first silence in years that didn't hurt. Behind me, the horizon burned faintly orange as the sun began to set. I thought about everything that had brought me here: the hospital bed, the storage unit, the confrontation, the courtroom, the headlines. Each moment felt both distant and permanent, like constellations fixed in memory. I'd spent so long fighting ghosts that I'd forgotten how to live among the living. Now, standing in the salt air, I realized peace wasn't something you win. It's something you stop resisting. I remembered the first time I ever flew solo. My father had stood on the runway, arms crossed, shouting instructions through the headset. I'd been too focused on the instruments to answer. When I touched down, he didn't smile, didn't congratulate me. He just said, "You followed procedure." Back then, I thought pride meant approval. Now I knew it meant something else entirely: silence that didn't demand permission. I never spoke to him again after the trial. The last I heard, he'd moved to Montana, living quietly under another kind of sky. Sometimes I wondered if he watched the news, if he ever saw the footage of his daughter standing on that stage. Maybe he understood now that what he called defiance was the same discipline he'd drilled into me, turned inside out, finally aimed at truth. Maybe not. Some questions don't need answers. I took the badge Voss had given me from my pocket and held it up to the light. It was old, the metal scratched, the words barely visible. "You were right," I whispered. "Justice doesn't end, it just changes shape." I placed it on the sand beside the water where the waves could decide what to do with it. A gull cried overhead, a single sound cutting through the wind. The tide reached forward, touched the badge, and pulled it away. Watching it sink felt like closing a chapter I hadn't realized was still open. I stayed until the sky turned from orange to violet. The stars came one by one, shy at first, then bright and sure. I could almost hear Daniel's voice again, the way he used to hum under his breath during flights, some half-remembered tune with no words. I smiled at the memory. "Some wounds heal in silence," I said to the horizon. "Others keep us flying straight." The words didn't feel rehearsed, they just were like gravity or breath. I walked back to the car as the wind picked up. My hands were cold, but steady. The road home was dark and empty headlights carving through mist. For once, the darkness didn't feel like danger. It felt like belonging. At a red light on the outskirts of Richmond, I glanced up. A small plane crossed overhead, its navigation lights blinking against the night. I imagined the pilot, maybe one of my students, tracing the sky with the same precision I'd once feared to trust. I whispered under my breath, "Fly true." When I reached my apartment, I left the window open. The sound of distant engines drifted in, blending with the hum of city life below. I sat by the window, breathing in the cool air, and realized I didn't need silence anymore. I needed the noise of life, the unpredictable, imperfect kind. Tomorrow, I would teach another student how to take off, how to trust the wind, how to let go. And maybe without knowing it, they would carry a piece of everything that had come before Daniel's courage. Voss's faith, even my father's iron discipline, reshaped into something gentler. The world kept turning, and I was still here, not as a soldier, not as a symbol, but as a person learning how to begin again. The sky outside shifted from indigo to black, and the lights of Richmond reflected in the river like constellations reborn. Somewhere out there, another storm was forming, another injustice waiting to be exposed. But for now, the world was quiet enough. The stars watched, patient and eternal. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to meet their gaze. The camera opens on a golden horizon, the Virginia sky fading from blue to amber. The hum of the Cessna fills the air, steady, rhythmic, alive. Below, the coastline stretches like memory itself, the marshlands, the quiet towns, the distant shimmer of the ocean that has seen too much. Reagan Holt's voice begins over the sound of wind and engine. I learned that loyalty without truth is just obedience. The Air Force taught me precision. Betrayal taught me purpose. The camera lingers on her hands, steady on the controls, the sunlight glinting off a small scar near her wrist. She flies low over the Chesapeake, the plane slicing through the last warmth of day. Her eyes are calm now, not haunted, not hard, just clear. She looks down at the water where the Atlantic meets the bay, the place where everything began and ended. The shot widens, showing the faint silhouette of an island below, empty, except for the memory of a crash. Her voice continues, slower measured, as if each word has been earned by pain and time. I used to believe discipline made you strong, that if you followed the rules long enough, the truth would take care of itself. But rules are only as honest as the people who write them, and the truth, she pauses, exhaling the truth, demands its own kind of discipline. The Cessna banks, slightly sunlight flashing across the fuselage. The world below glows orange and gold. Reagan looks out over the horizon and the wind catches her voice again. They called what I did a scandal. Some called it courage, but I know what it really was. It was survival, the kind that doesn't end when the battle's over. Cut to interior, the cockpit bathed in fading light. A photo is clipped near the altimeter Daniel Pierce in his flight suit, smiling wind in his hair. She glances at it briefly, not with sadness, but with a quiet kind of pride. He once told me that flying is just falling in the right direction. Maybe life's the same way. You fall through everything you thought you knew, and if you're lucky, you land where the air is still clean. She adjusts the throttle, her movements precise, instinctive. The altimeter needle trembles slightly, then steadies. The camera captures her reflection in the canopy glass, older, wiser, softer. People think justice feels like victory, she says. It doesn't. It feels like silence after the storm. It feels like breathing in a world that no longer asks you to lie. The plane turns west now toward the mainland. The fields of Virginia unfold beneath her, stitched together by rivers that look like veins of light. The voiceover deepens, intimate and reflective. My father once told me that feelings make soldiers weak. He was wrong. Feelings make us human. And sometimes, humanity is the bravest thing you can hold on to. Cut to flash a blurred memory of Robert Holt standing on the porch in Arlington, the floodlight burning behind him. The echo of his voice. "You're still my daughter." Then silence. Back to present. The Cessna flies over the ocean low and slow. I used to think strength meant not breaking, she continues. Now I know it's what you do after you've broken that matters. The pieces don't go back the same way, but sometimes that's the point. The plane climbs higher, slicing through a bank of clouds. The sunlight turns red, spilling across the cockpit. Reagan's hand rests on the flight yoke, her movements small, controlled, but peaceful. The camera cuts briefly to the passenger seat, empty except for a folded piece of paper. The envelope Daniel left her, the one that began everything. Its worn edges soft from time. She keeps it there not as grief, but as compass. "I don't fly for the flag anymore," she says quietly. "I fly for the ones who never got to finish their flight plan, for the voices that were silenced in hangars and hallways, for Daniel, for the truth." The engine hums louder, then softens as she levels off. The light outside shifts, turning the clouds into liquid gold. She looks down again toward the water, where a small flash of metal glimmers beneath the surface, the wreckage perhaps, or what's left of it. The next shot follows her gaze as something falls from the plane, a metal old and tarnished, its ribbon fluttering as it descends through the air. It hits the water, sinking slowly, sunlight catching its edges. It's her father's medal. The camera holds on it just long enough for the ripples to fade. Reagan's voice breaks the silence again. That medal once meant everything to him. Now it belongs to the ocean. Maybe that's where honor should rest, someplace deeper than men can reach. The Cessna banks toward the setting sun, the horizon burning brighter. The world below fades to shadow, only the water and the sky remaining. Her voice continues quieter now, almost a whisper. "The funny thing about truth is that once it's out, you can't bury it again. It floats. It rises. It finds the light even after everything else sinks." Cut to interior cockpit. Reagan takes her hands off the controls for a moment, letting the plane fly itself. The camera focuses on her face, serene, strong, a hint of a smile ghosting her lips. "I used to think flying was about control. Now I know it's about trust. You trust the air to hold you, the machine to obey yourself, to let go. Justice is the same. You do everything you can, then you let the truth take its own course." The clouds part ahead, revealing the vast expanse of coastline bathed in twilight. "Some people spend their lives trying to erase their past," she says. "But you can't erase what's written in sky and salt. You can only fly through it until it becomes a part of who you are." The camera drifts outside the plane, now capturing it from behind as it glides through the orange and violet glow. "The Air Force taught me precision," she repeats softly. "Betrayal taught me purpose. And purpose, that's what keeps me flying." Music swells, a slow orchestral build, strings and piano carrying her final words. "If you're watching this," she says, "and you've ever been told to stay quiet, remember this. Silence protects the powerful, but truth protects everyone else." Choose who you want to serve. The screen fades to the last aerial shot. The Cessna becomes a small silhouette against the dying sun. The metal disappears beneath the waves. The ocean ripples once, then stills the sky, reflecting on its surface like a mirror. Reagan's voice returns one last time, soft but unwavering. Some wounds heal in silence. Others keep us flying straight. Fade to black. The hum of the engine lingers for a few seconds, then fades too. Text appears on screen, based on true resilience. Then, after a pause, a final line appears white against the dark. Truth doesn't whisper. It waits. Have you ever stayed silent to protect someone powerful and regretted it later? If you have, you already understand the kind of quiet that eats through your bones. Maybe it was at work when the boss crossed a line and everyone looked away. Maybe it was at home where family loyalty meant pretending not to see the damage. Maybe it was somewhere deeper inside your own reflection where truth waited like a storm you didn't want to unleash. Silence is heavy. It doesn't fade. It grows roots. And sooner or later, those roots pull you down with them. I've learned that speaking up doesn't always make you the hero. Sometimes it makes you the outcast, the name they whisper in hallways, the one they try to erase. But I also learned something else when the noise dies, when the lies collapse. The only voice still standing is the one that refused to disappear. So let me ask again, how many of you watching this have kept quiet to protect someone who never protected you? Tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, how old you are, and what truth looks like where you live. Because every country has its own version of this story. Some wear uniforms, others wear suits. Some hide behind titles, others hide behind family. But the pattern is the same power feeding on silence, and silence pretending it's peace. If you're watching from the United States, you know this story in your bones. You've seen headlines like these: commanders accused officials investigated families divided between honor and conscience. If you're from another country, you might have your own word for it. Corruption, obedience, fear, or maybe you call it tradition. Wherever you are, you know what it feels like to bite your tongue until it bleeds, to tell yourself you're just waiting for the right time. But the right time never announces itself. It shows up when the cost of silence finally outweighs the comfort of survival. That's when everything changes. I want you to think about that moment. Maybe it hasn't come yet. Maybe it's closer than you think. If this story meant something to you, if Reagan Holt's fight for truth reminded you of something you've buried, don't let the credits roll and move on. Sit with it. Ask yourself who you'd be if you stopped being afraid of the fallout. Justice doesn't always happen in courtrooms. Sometimes it starts in kitchens, classrooms, or the space between two people deciding enough is enough. Sometimes it's as small as telling the truth once and never taking it back. And yes, it comes with loss. You lose comfort, approval, safety. You lose people who only loved your silence. But what you gain, self-respect, clarity, freedom, outlasts every headline, every betrayal, every scar. Look at Reagan. She didn't win by revenge. She won by exposure. By refusing to die quietly. She didn't destroy the system, but she cracked it enough for the light to get in. And that's where real justice begins. Not when the powerful fall, but when the powerless stop kneeling. Think about your own story. Maybe you served, maybe you didn't. Maybe you're 50, sitting in a living room somewhere in Oklahoma, coffee in hand, remembering the one time you stayed quiet when you shouldn't have. Maybe you're 70 in Maine and you've carried a secret your whole life that deserved to be told decades ago. Or maybe you're 30 and just now realizing that silence doesn't make you loyal, it makes you complicit. Wherever you are, speak up. Comment below. Tell me your state, your country, your truth. The more we name what's broken, the harder it becomes for it to hide. If this story made you angry, good. Anger is the spark before change. If it made you cry, even better. Tears are the body's way of washing out denial. And if it made you think, then stay. Don't scroll. Don't click away. Let this story remind you that justice isn't just for headlines. It's for everyone who's ever been told, keep quiet and move on. Don't move on. Not yet. Because the world only changes when enough people decide they're done watching it stay the same. When I write stories like this, I don't write them for sympathy. I write them for memory. I write them so people like Reagan Holt, fictional or not, don't vanish into silence again. I write them because someone out there is sitting in their own version of that ICU room holding their breath, wondering if anyone will believe them when they finally speak. If that's you, hear me clearly. Your story matters. Even if it's messy, even if no one claps, even if it costs you the people who once said they loved you. Because the truth doesn't need applause. It only needs air. So take a breath, then use it. I want to know where you're watching from. Type it out, city, state, or country. Tell me your age. Tell me how truth and justice look where you live. Are they strangers, or do they still sit at the same table? Do they wear uniforms or carry briefcases? Do they walk free or hide behind closed doors? Let's find out together. One comment, one story at a time. The more we speak, the less they can silence. The more we connect, the less we forget. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone wakes up in a hospital bed with the world turned against them, they'll have a reason to believe that someone somewhere will listen. So stay with me. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Stories about courage, truth, and the cost of both. Because we're building something here, not entertainment, but remembrance. A record of what happens when the quiet finally finds its voice. And if you've ever looked at your life and thought, this isn't fair, then you belong here. Leave a comment. Let's talk about what fairness means to you. Let's talk about what justice looks like in your town. Let's talk about the people who stood up when no one else did and the ones who still can. The story you just heard isn't just Reagan's. It's every story that's ever started with fear and ended with freedom. It's proof that even in a world built on silence, a single truth can shake the ground. And maybe that truth is waiting for you to tell it next. Have you ever stayed silent to protect someone powerful and regretted it later? Tell me your age and where you're watching from. I want to know how truth and justice look where you live.